My name is Arthur Pendelton, and for 15 years, I poured my lifeblood into Sterling and Finch, a titan in the investment banking world. My domain was mergers and acquisitions, specifically the complex high-stakes valuation models that made or broke deals worth billions. I was the architect of the algorithmic valuation system AVs, a proprietary software that had, for the last 7 years, been the crown jewel of Sterling and Finch's M&A division, consistently outperforming every competitor's methodology. It wasn't just good. It was revolutionary, predicting market shifts and identifying undervalued assets with uncanny accuracy. My team, a small but fiercely loyal group of quants and financial analysts, operated with an efficiency and camaraderie rarely seen in such a cutthroat industry. We celebrated every successful close, every bonus, every promotion as a collective victory. Life outside the office was good too. My wife, Sarah, and our 2 children, Emily and Tom, were my anchors. They were why I worked so hard, why I meticulously refined a VS, why I sometimes pulled all-nighters fueled by lukewarm coffee and the thrill of a complex deal. My reputation within Sterling and Finch, and even across the industry, was solid, built on a foundation of integrity, unparalleled analytical skill, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. I was the guy you called when a deal looked impossible, the one who could find the hidden value, the leverage, the angle no one else saw. The first tremor of instability came subtly, a barely perceptible shift in the corporate winds. It began with whispers, then more overt conversations about a new strategic direction. Elias Thorne, the newly appointed CEO, a man whose ambition was as boundless as his ego, had a vision. His vision, as it turned out, involved dismantling anything that preceded him and replacing it with his own, less proven but undeniably flashier initiatives. He was a creature of optics, a master of boardroom theatrics, and deeply uncomfortable with anything he didn't fully grasp, which, ironically, included the intricate mathematics of a VS. The whispers solidified into concrete action when Thorne announced a restructuring of the M&A division. He brought in Dom Vance, a hotshot from a rival firm, as the new global head of M&A. Dom was all slick suits and empty promises. A man who spoke in buzzwords and projected confidence he didn't possess. His claim to fame was a single, marginally successful hostile takeover, which, as industry insiders knew, was more luck than skill. Dom's first directive was to streamline our operations, which translated to systematically isolating me and my team. Our input on major deals was increasingly ignored. Our reports filed away unread and our access to critical data restricted. Then came the meeting. It was a Tuesday, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Thorne, Dom, and a contingent of board members sat across from me in the opulent, intimidating executive boardroom. Thorne, without preamble, declared that AFC's was outdated and inefficient. He cited vague market shifts and technological advancements as reasons, none of which held any weight. Dom, with a sneering smirk, added that the system was too complex for modern market dynamics, a statement that betrayed his complete ignorance of its capabilities. They proposed replacing AVs with a third-party AI-driven solution, a nebulous concept with no real substance that Dom had supposedly championed at his previous firm. I argued passionately, logically, presenting reams of data, performance metrics, and testimonials from clients and internal teams. I pointed out the astronomical cost of developing a new system from scratch, the inherent risks, and the proven track record of AVS. I even offered to adapt AVS to integrate any new technologies they desired. My words, however, fell on deaf ears. Thorne cut me off mid-sentence, his voice dripping with condescension. "Arthur," he said, leaning back in his plush leather chair, "your loyalty is commendable, but your vision is limited. The board has voted. AVS is being decommissioned. And frankly, your services are no longer required." The words hit me like a physical blow. Fired after 15 years. The betrayal was absolute, a gut-wrenching realization that everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed for, was being discarded by men who cared only for appearances and personal gain. My mind reeled. How could they do this? How could they dismantle a system that was a demonstrable asset, a profit engine, simply to serve their ego? The next few days were a blur of numb disbelief and crushing despair. HR, usually a bastion of corporate process, became a wall of polite but firm indifference. They offered a severance package, a paltry sum compared to the years of dedication, contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement that would effectively gag me from ever speaking. About a VS or Sterling and Finch's internal dealings, when I attempted to appeal to higher management, to anyone who might understand the gravity of their decision, I was met with the same cold, rehearsed lines. The board has made its decision, Arthur. We wish you well in your future endeavors. The emotional impact was devastating. Sarah tried to be strong, but I saw the fear in her eyes, the worry for our children, for our future. My reputation, once unblemished, now had a stain of question. Mark, fired without cause, especially after leading such a critical division, raised eyebrows in the tight-knit world of investment banking. Would anyone hire me after this? Would my expertise, once so highly valued, now be seen as a liability? The anger simmered beneath the surface, a slow, burning rage that threatened to consume me. It wasn't just about the job. It was about the profound injustice, the deliberate destruction of my life's work, the callous disregard for everything I had contributed. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this couldn't stand. They had betrayed me, and they would pay. The initial days post-firing were a maelstrom of emotions, grief, rage, and a suffocating sense of helplessness. I tried the official channels again, clinging to the faint hope that reason might prevail. I drafted a meticulously detailed letter to the board of directors outlining the irreparable damage decommissioning AVs would cause, citing specific performance metrics and market forecasts. I even provided a concise proposal for its modernization, demonstrating its adaptability. The response was a boilerplate email from the General Counsel's office, reiterating the terms of my severance and reminding me of the non-disclosure agreement. It was a clear message. They didn't care about logic, only about control and silencing dissent. My attempts to contact former colleagues who might have sympathized were met with awkward silences or hurried excuses. The corporate machine had effectively isolated me, but beneath the despair, a seed of resolve began to sprout. The helplessness slowly morphed into a steely determination. They thought they could discard me and my legacy. They thought they could sweep their incompetence under the rug. They had profoundly underestimated me. I was a master of valuation, of finding hidden flaws and overlooked assets. I would apply that same rigorous analysis to them. My first step was a strategic assessment. What were Thorne and Dom's vulnerabilities? Thorne's ego was immense, his desire for public validation insatiable. He craved the spotlight, the headlines, the image of a visionary leader. Dom, on the other hand, was a charlatan, relying on bluster rather than substance. His eye-driven solution was almost certainly a facade, a buzzword-laden smokescreen to justify his hefty salary and solidify his position. The key, I realized, lay in their reliance on the very system they had discarded. AVs, while they claimed it was obsolete, they were still using its underlying data structures and methodologies, albeit poorly, to maintain some semblance of operational continuity. They couldn't just throw out years of accumulated financial intelligence overnight. The research phase began in earnest. I moved my operations to my home office, a space I had always kept meticulously organized, now transformed into a war room. My initial focus was on gathering information, anything that could serve as leverage. I started by meticulously reviewing my old employment contract, scouring every clause, every addendum. There, nestled within the dense legal jargon, was a golden nugget. a clause stipulating that any proprietary system developed by an employee, demonstrably critical to the company's core operations and subsequently decommissioned without just cause, would revert to the developer's intellectual property after a specified cooling-off period. The cooling-off period was 6 months. It was a long shot, a relic from a different era of innovation, but it was a lifeline. Next, I focused on Dom Vance. I leveraged my extensive network in the finance industry, discreetly reaching out to former colleagues, headhunters, and even disgruntled employees from Dom's previous firm. I pieced together a picture of a man who consistently overpromised and underdelivered. His AI-driven solution at his last company had been a monumental failure masked by aggressive PR and clever accounting. Crucially, I learned that a former subordinate of Dom's, data scientist named Lena Petrova, had been unceremoniously fired when she raised concerns about the system's integrity. Lena was an ally in the making. I also began to dig into Sterling and Finch's recent financial reports and public filings. With AVs decommissioned, their performance would inevitably suffer. It was a matter of when, not if. I started building my own parallel valuation models, running simulations with publicly available data, demonstrating the inevitable decline in their M&A success rate without AVs. This would be my evidence, my irrefutable proof. My skill development involved a two-pronged approach. First, I needed to upgrade my technical arsenal. While AVs was my brainchild, the financial tech landscape was constantly evolving. I immersed myself in advanced data analytics, machine learning, and cybersecurity protocols. I took online courses, devoured academic papers, and spent countless hours experimenting with open-source tools. I didn't just want to prove AFZ was superior. I wanted to demonstrate that I, Arthur Pendelton, was still at the forefront of financial innovation. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about professional vindication. Second, I needed allies. Lena Petrova was my first target. It took weeks of careful anonymous communication, slowly building trust, verifying her identity through mutual connections. When we finally met in a nondescript coffee shop, her eyes, though weary, held a familiar spark of righteous indignation. She confirmed my suspicions about Dom's AI solution. It was a cobbled-together mess, prone to errors and dangerously unreliable. She had kept meticulously documented proof of its failures, knowing in her gut that Dom would eventually try to shift blame. Lena, scarred by her own corporate betrayal, was eager for justice. She became my invaluable technical advisor and an unexpected emotional anchor. The obstacles were formidable. Sterling and Finch had formidable legal resources. They also had the power of the financial establishment on their side. Any direct attack, any premature move would be crushed under the weight of their legal department. I had to operate in the shadows, meticulously, patiently. I also faced internal conflicts. Doubt gnawed at me. Was this worth it? The personal cost was immense. My family worried. My reputation was on the line. Could I truly cross the ethical lines necessary for this kind of retribution? But every time I saw the fear in Sarah's eyes, every time I remembered Thorne's condescending smirk, the resolve hardened. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about preventing them from doing this to anyone else. As the 6-month cooling-off period for AVs approached, I began to lay the groundwork for my first move. I identified a secondary antagonist, Elias Thorne, Lisa's younger brother, a brash, incompetent VP of business development who owed his position entirely to nepotism. Marcus was infamous for leaking confidential information in an attempt to look important. He was my weakness. I started subtly feeding him carefully crafted, seemingly innocuous, but ultimately misleading market intelligence. Knowing he wouldn't be able to resist sharing it, this wasn't about outright destruction, but about setting the stage, testing my methods, and creating a ripple that would eventually become a tidal wave. The board thought they had buried me. They were about to learn that I was merely biding my time, sharpening my blade, with Lena as my trusted ally and the 6-month cooling-off period ticking away. My revenge plan crystallized. This wouldn't be a direct assault. It would be a strategic dismantling, a meticulous unraveling of their carefully constructed facade. I envisioned it as a series of cascading failures, each one triggered by a seemingly innocuous event, culminating in the public exposure of their incompetence and deceit. The revenge plan development was akin to designing a complex financial instrument, each component precisely calibrated to achieve a specific outcome. My primary target remained Elias Thorne and Dominic Vance, but I knew I needed to chip away at their supporting structures first. Marcus Thorne, Elias's brother, was the first domino. My objective was to expose his unreliability and, by extension, the nepotism that ran rampant within Sterling and Finch, steadily undermining Elias's authority. My preparation and skill building continued relentlessly. Lena, with her deep understanding of database structures and system vulnerabilities, became my technical co-pilot. We spent hours dissecting publicly available data on Sterling and Finch's current M&A activities, cross-referencing it with historical data from when a VS was fully operational. The difference was stark. Their deal success rates were plummeting, their valuations increasingly inaccurate. This data would be the cornerstone of my public exposure. I also delved deeper into the regulatory landscape of the financial industry. I studied every obscure SEC filing, every corporate governance guideline, every anti-fraud statute. My goal wasn't just to expose them, but to ensure there were legal consequences and accountability that official channels had denied me. I learned about obscure clauses related to material misrepresentation in financial reporting and the penalties for knowingly operating with flawed valuation systems. The preliminary moves against secondary targets began with Marcus Thorne. I continued to feed him what appeared to be exclusive, high-value market insights. These insights, while plausible on the surface, contained subtle, embedded inaccuracies designed to lead to incorrect decisions. For instance, I'd provide him with a supposed insider tip about a small-cap tech company being undervalued, knowing that the company's Q3 earnings, when released, would reveal a significant unforeseen liability. Marcus, eager to impress his brother and claim credit, would invariably leak this hot tip to internal teams and even some external clients, often over a few too many drinks at industry events. The resulting investment losses and embarrassing public missteps would then directly reflect on the M&A division and, by extension, on Dom Vance's new AI-driven solution, which was supposed to prevent such errors. The beauty of it was that Marcus would never suspect the source, believing he was simply unlucky or that the information had been just slightly off. He was a perfect unwitting pawn, as Marcus unwittingly caused minor, yet accumulating financial blunders, obstacles, and complications arose. Sterling and Finch's internal security was robust. I couldn't directly access their systems. Lena and I had to rely on open-source intelligence. Leaked documents from disgruntled former employees, there were more than I initially imagined, and the carefully cultivated network of contacts I had built over years in the industry. One significant hurdle was the sheer scale of the information. To build an airtight case, I needed to show a pattern of systemic failure directly attributable to the decommissioning of AVs and the potentiation of Dom's faulty system. This meant cross-referencing thousands of data points, analyzing historical trends, and predicting future performance deviations with scientific precision. It was a Herculean task, often leaving me drained and questioning my sanity. Another unexpected challenge came from Lena Vance, Dom's wife, who was a high-profile corporate lawyer specializing in intellectual property. I discovered through a mutual acquaintance that she was aggressively pursuing an unrelated IP lawsuit against a former Sterling and Finch employee who had left to start a competing venture. This was a direct threat. She suspected I was building a case against her husband. Her legal resources and influence could easily preemptively shut me down, perhaps even before the 6-month cooling-off period for AVs elapsed. I had to operate with extreme stealth, leaving no digital footprint, no paper trail. The final piece of my strategy involved identifying the catalyst for the ultimate revelation. It wouldn't be enough to just expose their failures. I needed to hit them where it hurt the most, their reputation and their market value. This meant targeting an upcoming high-profile deal that Sterling Finch was aggressively pursuing. If I could demonstrate their incompetence on such a public stage, the fallout would be catastrophic. Lena, through her former contacts, got wind of a massive multi-billion-dollar merger Sterling Finch was advising on the acquisition of a leading biotech firm, Biogenics, by a pharmaceutical giant. This was it, the perfect opportunity. As the 6-month mark loomed, my focus shifted to this impending deal. I began running parallel valuations using a fully updated and refined version of a VS, predicting the true, much lower value of Biogenics. Taking into account hidden liabilities that Dom's superficial AI would undoubtedly miss, my plan was to publicly expose Sterling Finch's inflated valuation just before the deal was finalized, demonstrating the catastrophic error and, by extension, the critical flaw in their current M&A operations. I knew this would involve significant personal risk, possibly even legal action against me for interfering with a major corporate transaction. But the thought of vindication, of seeing Thorne and Dom's carefully constructed empire crumble, spurred me forward. The chess pieces were set. I was ready for the main confrontation. The air crackled with anticipation as the date for the Biogenics acquisition approached. My refined AVs had consistently predicted a valuation for Biogenics significantly lower than Sterling and Finch's publicly touted figures. The discrepancy was alarming, rooted in a nuanced understanding of regulatory hurdles and patent expiration dates that Dom Vance's generic AI solution clearly lacked. My primary revenge strategy hinged on exposing this disparity to the public and, more importantly, to the key players involved in the deal. My first move was to leverage Marcus Thorne's incorrigible habit of boasting through a series of untraceable, encrypted messages disguised as tips from a concerned insider. I planted seeds of doubt about the Biogenics valuation within the broader investment community. These messages were crafted to pique curiosity, subtly questioning Sterling Finch's methodology without directly implicating me. The market analysts, ever hungry for an edge, began to re-examine the deal with a more critical eye. Then came the calculated strike, 2 days before the official announcement of the Biogenics acquisition. I anonymously released a meticulously compiled white paper to a select group of influential financial journalists and independent analysts. This document, titled The Illusion, a deep dive into biotech acquisition models, did not mention Sterling Finch by name. Instead, it presented a hypothetical but strikingly similar acquisition scenario, detailing the precise methodologies and data points that should be considered for an accurate valuation of a biotech firm with Biogenics' profile. Crucially, it highlighted the potential for significant overvaluation if critical factors, like pending litigation or expiring patents, were overlooked. My AVS's predictions were integrated into this hypothetical scenario, subtly showcasing its superior accuracy. The paper, elegant in its analysis and devastating in its implications, spread like wildfire. Financial blogs buzzed, analysts started running their own numbers, and the whispers turned into a clamor. Suddenly, the Biogenics acquisition, previously seen as a sure thing, was under intense scrutiny. The pharmaceutical giant, the acquirer, began to demand further clarification from Sterling Finch. Unexpected challenges and setbacks immediately emerged. Elias Thorne, enraged by the sudden negative press, publicly dismissed the white paper as baseless speculation from disgruntled amateurs. Dom Vance, ever the opportunist, went on financial news channels, confidently asserting the infallibility of his AI-driven solution and scoffing at outdated methodologies. Their arrogance was palpable, and for a moment, I feared my efforts would be drowned out by their corporate spin. Then came the legal pressure. Eleanor Vance, Dom's wife, a tenacious and highly effective corporate lawyer, began issuing cease and desist letters to any journalist who dared to link the white paper to Sterling and Finch or the biogenics deal. She also launched an aggressive public relations campaign, painting her husband as a visionary and any critics as jealous competitors. This was the major twist I had anticipated. I knew Eleanor would react, but her ferocity was a testament to how close I was to striking a nerve. However, I had a countermove ready. Lena, working tirelessly, had discovered an obscure but legally binding regulatory filing from Dom's previous firm. It detailed the spectacular failure of his purported AI-driven solution during a critical project, leading to significant financial losses and an internal investigation that had been quietly swept under the rug. This was the proof of his systemic incompetence. Just as Eleanor's legal offensive was at its peak, Lena, using a secure, untraceable server, anonymously leaked this damning document to a prominent investigative journalist known for their fearless reporting on corporate malfeasance. The leak landed like a bombshell. The narrative shifted instantly. Dom Vance, once the confident visionary, was now exposed as a serial fraud. The biogenics deal, already wobbling under the weight of my white paper, began to crumble. The pharmaceutical giant, terrified of acquiring an overvalued asset and facing potential lawsuits, demanded an independent audit of biogenics' financials and Sterling and Finch's valuation process. The direct confrontation arrived in the form of an emergency board meeting at Sterling and Finch, BROADCAST, live on a major financial news network. A desperate attempt by Thorne to regain control of the narrative. Through my proxy, the investigative journalist was given a prime-time interview slot immediately following the board meeting's conclusion. Thorne, pale and visibly agitated, stumbled through a defense of his decisions, blaming market volatility and unforeseen circumstances for the biogenics fiasco. Dom Vance, sweating profusely, repeated his hollow assurances about his AI, as the journalist, armed with Lena's leaked documents, began to systematically dismantle his claims. Then it was my turn. In my live interview, I calmly and dispassionately explained the intricacies of biotech valuation, the specific factors that had been overlooked, and the catastrophic implications of an inflated acquisition. I presented the AV's models stripped of proprietary data, demonstrating the precision with which I had predicted the current crisis. I didn't accuse, I merely presented data allowing the numbers to speak for themselves. I revealed, without naming names, that a superior, proven algorithmic system had existed within Sterling and Finch for years, only to be inexplicably discarded for an unproven, demonstrably flawed alternative. The public, the shareholders, the market, they heard me. They saw the calm, reasoned analysis contrasted with the panicked, dissembling statements from Thorne and Vance. The stock of Sterling and Finch plummeted. The biogenics deal was put on indefinite hold. The board, facing a shareholder revolt and a looming SEC investigation, knew their time was up. My revenge was being successfully delivered, not through brute force, but through the precise application of truth and intellect. The immediate fallout from the biogenics debacle was swift and brutal. A perfectly orchestrated symphony of professional downfall. The stock market reacted with ferocity. Sterling and Finch's share price tanked, wiping out billions in market capitalization. The pharmaceutical giant, having narrowly avoided a disastrous acquisition, announced it was severing all ties with Sterling and Finch, citing gross negligence and misleading valuations. Elias Thorne, his reputation in tatters, was summarily forced to resign as CEO, the board under immense pressure from activist shareholders. issued a public statement citing strategic misalignment and the need for fresh leadership. His carefully cultivated image as a visionary leader was shattered, replaced by the public perception of an arrogant, incompetent executive who drove a prestigious firm to the brink. His financial compensation tied to performance bonuses evaporated. His future in the corporate world, once boundless, was now effectively over. Dominic Vance fared even worse. The leaked documents detailing the catastrophic failure of his AI-driven solution at his previous firm, combined with his dismal performance on the biogenics deal, made him a pariah in the finance industry. The SEC launched a formal investigation into his professional conduct, specifically regarding the ethical implications of knowingly presenting flawed valuation models. His career, built on smoke and mirrors, imploded. No reputable firm would touch him. His professional downfall was total. His name synonymous with incompetence and deceit. Eleanor Vance, Dom's aggressive lawyer wife, faced a different kind of consequence. While her legal tactics hadn't broken any laws, her zealous defense of her husband, despite overwhelming evidence of his failures, damaged her professional credibility. Other firms grew wary of engaging a lawyer whose ethical compass seemed so skewed by personal loyalties. For me, the consequences were profoundly satisfying. My name, once whispered with sympathy for being unfairly dismissed, was now celebrated. The financial journalists who had initially received my white paper and the investigative journalist who broke the story about Dom Vance's past failures publicly lauded my analytical prowess and foresight. My reputation, far from being tarnished, was elevated. I was the financial savant who had dared to stand up to corporate arrogance and won. Lena Petrova, my invaluable ally, received a job offer from a major fintech startup, eager to tap into her expertise and integrity. She also co-authored an academic paper with me, detailing the flaws in overly simplistic AI models when applied to complex financial markets, solidifying her own professional standing. The experience had brought significant protagonist growth for me. I had started as a loyal, somewhat naive employee, believing in the system. The betrayal had forced me to confront the darker side of corporate power. I had walked a fine line, crossing ethical boundaries by engaging in a form of vigilante justice. But I had done so with a clear conscience, knowing it was the only way to achieve true accountability. The moral dilemmas I faced, the fear of retaliation, the personal cost to my family, the question of whether revenge was truly justified had forged a stronger, more resilient Arthur Pendelton. I learned that true justice sometimes requires unconventional methods, and that intelligence and strategic thinking can be more powerful than brute corporate force. My career advancement was unexpected and profound. Instead of seeking another position within a traditional investment bank, I was approached by several hedge funds and private equity firms offering me consulting roles at rates far exceeding my previous salary. They weren't just interested in my analytical skills. They were interested in my ability to foresee and navigate complex corporate challenges, a skill honed through my ordeal. I also started my own independent financial advisory firm, specializing in risk assessment and due diligence for high-stakes mergers and acquisitions. My first major client was the pharmaceutical giant that had almost fallen prey to Sterling and Finch's inflated valuation. The personal closure was immense. The gnawing anger had dissipated, replaced by a sense of peace and vindication. My family was proud, not just of my professional success, but of my unwavering integrity. The fear in Sarah's eyes had been replaced by admiration. I had proven to myself and to the world that competence and ethical conduct would, in the end, prevail. The experience had been harrowing, but it had also been transformative. My story serves as a testament in the corporate world. True power doesn't always lie in titles or positions, but in intelligence, integrity, and the courage to seek justice even when the odds seem insurmountable. The board had betrayed me, but by triggering an audit through strategic revelation. I had not only regained my own professional standing, but also exposed the rot at the heart of their empire. My revenge wasn't about destruction for its own sake, but about restoration, restoring truth, integrity, and accountability to a system that had forgotten its way. The future was unwritten, but one thing was certain. I was no longer a victim, but a formidable force to be reckoned with.